Well, I guess we're just gonna keep watching weird videos about psychology and whatnot. Terrible paradox of self-awareness because YouTube said, "Hey, this is a cool video," and I clicked it. Oh,
Use the link in the description and you'll receive 1 free week and 25% off an annual premium membership.
I don't know what that was for.
Sometimes the story behind a work of art is just as fascinating as the work itself. Sometimes its origin is part of its content.
Oh yeah.
The story of 20th century writer Fernando Pessoa and his masterwork, The Book of Disquiet, is one of those cases where the story behind it sounds like a work of fiction itself. Pessoa was born in 1888 in Lisbon, Portugal. At the early age of just 5 years old, he was exposed to loss and impermanence when his father died of tuberculosis, and then the following year, his younger brother died. Not long after, his mother remarried and his family moved to South Africa, also taking from. Not long after,
Why do families in old pictures just never look happy? They always just look dead, like ghostly. It's so weird.
his mother remarried and his family moved to South Africa, also taking from Fernando the landscape of his childhood. While living in South Africa, Pessoa became fluent in English and developed an appreciation for English literature. When he turned 17, he returned to Lisbon by himself, where he would spend the rest of his life and dedicate most of his time to writing. However, by the time he died in 1935, at the age of 47, he had only published a few books that went mostly unnoticed, and he essentially wrote in complete obscurity, unknown by anyone. But yet, he seemingly died knowing that he was a great literary figure, or at the very least, that he would likely become one. And in an almost unsettling prophetic way, he was right.
What if he was
After his
wrong?
death, Pessoa's work, the manuscript of the Book of Disquiet,
I bet
along with tens of
a lot of people die with a lot of like stuff that they wrote thinking that they were great, and that someday after they're dead they will be known as what they always were, a great writer. And this is just one of the cases where it just, happened to be.
thousands of other manuscript pages that are still to this day being edited remain tucked away in a wooden trunk, unknown by anyone. It wasn't until 1982,
Like Kafka?
47 years after Pessoa died, eerily the exact same age of Pessoa when he died, that the Book of Disquiet was found and published. This book would go on to become what is widely regarded as one of the most unique and important literary works of the 20th century. Inside the book is a lifetime worth of Pessoa's reflections and musings about reality and dreaming, about tedium and selfhood, about the absurdity of being and the futility of doing, about the simultaneous complexity and simplicity of life.
Fernando Pessoa. I'm gonna have to make note of that.
About the contradiction and paradox at the core of everything. The book is made up of a collection of fragmented vignettes written in a style somewhere between diary entries and poetry. There is no real linear order to the book, and it can arguably be experienced just as well backwards as forwards. Even more interesting, Pessoa does not claim to be the author of any of it. Rather, it is credited to a man named Bernardo Soares, an assistant bookkeeper from Lisbon, Portugal, as well as possibly a man named Vicente Guedes. Guedes and Soares, however, aren't real. They are characters Pessoa created to create the book. Found throughout the massive collection of all of Pessoa's manuscript pages are various pseudonyms, fictitious authors that he credits different pages and collections to. These authors aren't just different pen names though, they are different characters with different writing styles and personalities and views and backstories.
That's
Pessoa
cool.
referred to these author characters as heteronyms, and there are around 80 that he wrote under throughout his lifetime. Thus, the Book of Disquiet is not exactly a non-fiction book from an anonymous author, but nor is it really a novel about a fictional character or story. It is somewhere in between. Because of this, it is often described as the weirdest autobiography ever written. Pessoa himself described it as a factless autobiography, or an autobiography of someone who never existed. The book's unique structure and style is,
That's
in many
cool.
ways, an essential supporting leg of the book's themes. The use of heteronyms seems to reinforce a key philosophical theme throughout the work: the fragmented and illusory nature of the self. With incredible accuracy and poignancy that feels cathartic to read, throughout the book, Pessoa frequently describes the inherent alienation, disorientation, and loneliness associated with being a person. He wrote, "I don't know how to feel or think or love. I'm a character in a novel as yet unwritten, hovering in the air and undone before I've even existed, amongst the dreams of someone who never quite managed to breathe life into me. I'm always thinking, always feeling, but my thoughts lack all reason, my emotions all feeling. I'm falling through a trapdoor, through infinite space, in a directionless, empty fall. My soul is a black maelstrom, a great madness spinning about a vacuum, the swirling of a vast ocean around a hole in the void, and in the waters, more like whirlwinds than waters, float images of all I ever saw or heard in the world: houses, faces, books, boxes, snatches of music, and fragments of voices, all caught up in a sinister bottomless whirlpool. And I myself, am the center that exists only because the geometry of the abyss demands it. I am the nothing around which all this spins. I exist so that it can spin. I am the center that exists only because every circle has one."
Okay then.
For Pessoa, self-understanding, or perhaps the attempt to understand the self, is a free fall down a rabbit hole with a landing that kills you. And the impossibility of understanding and communicating one's internal experiences while on this free fall
I had trouble understanding that paragraph.
lends itself to a lifetime of
Have
disquiet
to
and
read that
disorientation.
again.
Throughout the book, Pessoa also often discusses themes of tedium, futility, and meaninglessness. For him, everything is a sort of delusion. Life is a sequence of dreams. I've never done anything but dream. This and this alone has been the meaning of my life. My only real concern has been my inner life, Pessoa wrote. For Pessoa, there is no real point in doing or achieving anything. Reality as we experience it is as deluded and false and meaningful as the several dreams we had last night that dissolved upon awaking, never to be known or thought of again. Life is but a dream destined to be coated over with the fog of
Yeah, so who wants to be like sad and boring in their dreams though?
consciousness and forgotten upon the
I don't
morning
get that guy.
sunrise. Pessoa wrote, "If I write what I feel, it's to reduce the fever of feeling. What I confess is unimportant, because everything is unimportant."
Nah, dude, everything is important, even if it doesn't mean anything.
Recognition of the futility of doing anything and the advocation of receding into a dream world reinforces another major theme of the book: contradiction and paradox. After all, why write about the pointlessness of doing anything and the impossibility of ever adequately saying anything while doing something and saying things? Perhaps, however, this does not speak to the incoherence of Pessoa, but rather speaks to what Pessoa might believe is useful in paradox. In medicine, certain preventative and preparation treatments contain forms of the bacteria or virus that cause the disease the treatment is used to prevent. Likewise, arguably, both creating and consuming good literature and good art expose you to the virus of being so you can hopefully develop enough immunity to survive. Perhaps paradoxically then, the driving force that compelled Pessoa to create and write and do was the awareness that creating and writing and doing is pointless. It is also relevant to note that the Book of Disquiet was left unfinished. With this, it is almost as if the book mirrors Pessoa's philosophical conception of existence. Trapped inside a trunk, only truly known after Pessoa's death, once it could no longer be changed by him, interpreted only through a fragmented collection of vignettes, written by someone who never existed, finished by time, not by intention. The book itself seems to be an almost perfect metaphor for a person. It is unsettling to consider all of this, and then realize that the word Pessoa, his birth name, translates in English into person. If that's not enough, perhaps the most confounding aspect of the Book of Disquiet's
Was he real?
story is that it contains passages that prophesize its fate. In it, Pessoa wrote, "It sometimes occurs to me, with sad delight, that if one day, in a future I won't be part of, the sentences I write are read and admired, then at last I'll have my own kin, people who understand me, my true family in which to be born and loved. But far from being born into it, I'll have already died long ago. I'll be understood only in effigy, when affection can no longer compensate for the indifference that was the dead man's lot in life. Perhaps one day they'll understand that I fulfilled, like no one else, my instinctive duty to interpret a portion of our century, and when they've understood that, they'll write that in my time I was misunderstood, that the people around me were unfortunately indifferent and insensitive to my work, and that it was a pity this happened to me. And whoever writes this will fail to understand my literary counterpart in that future time, just as my contemporaries don't understand me. Because men learn only what would be of use to their great-grandparents. The right way to live is something we can teach only the dead." And of course, all of this came true. It's happening right now with these words. We are currently participating in Pessoa's fortune told by himself a century ago. One can only wonder, was this a masterfully constructed plan by a genius creative mind? Was it chance? Was it both? Or was it something else? Whatever the
Probably
case may be,
all three.
the story of the Book of Disquiet seems to have almost become a part of its artistic creation. It elicits an almost metaphysical spiritual quality. It feels like a religious book for atheists, a manual for nihilists. It can and probably will devastate most of those who read it, but it will also help comfort and remind one to not take oneself or life too seriously. Sometimes, exposure to the ailment is part of the treatment.
Oh, there's more.
This video was sponsored by Blinkist. Samantha was never a great reader. It wasn't that she didn't like reading or value books. On average, the entirety of Blink asked
Okay, the rest of it's just an ad. Well, definitely gonna look up this Fernando Pessoa or Fernando. I don't know how to pronounce that. Terrible paradox of self-awareness. Okay. Well, I'll keep that in mind.